Welcome to Creation in the 21st Century. I'm your host, Carl Baugh, founder and director of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. The title to today's program applies to your life, to your mindset, to your purpose in life. Is evolution true? Part 2. Here's the reason there's part 2. My special guest on the program was so intriguing, had so much information, that we just had to share it for another program. This is some of the most vital information you will ever receive. Is evolution true? Now, we're not asking this question to a fellow down the street who might be biased and who's never had a chance to examine the evidence. Our guest today is a world-class scholar. We're going to learn about what he does, what he has done, and what he wants to do to invest in your life. I'm happy to welcome my friend and brother, Dr. Joseph Mastropaolo, PhD. It's a delight to have you back on the program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baugh.
I have interviewed and had as guest on the program some of the very finest scholars alive, but I must admit, what you had to say on the last program was some of the best information, hardest hitting, factual information that's ever been exposed on this program.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being on the team.
I'm delighted to be on your team.
Now, you're a space scientist. Your specialty is kinesiology. Would you explain to this audience what kinesiology is?
Kinesiology is the study of biomechanics, how we move, and how we perform once we're in motion. And I also specialized in physiology for my postdoctoral research fellowship.
Marvelous. This involves the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, the musculature, the metabolism, the function of the brain, all the way to the little toe.
Correct.
And not only have you studied in that area, you have been recognized as a master in that area. In fact, I like your name, Mastropaolo. You probably have a relationship to a master who taught one of the world's great scholars of the past, correct?
Well, that's the family story.
I like it. Tell us, tell us.
The family story is that Michelangelo had a teacher whose name was Paul, and in Italian, the teacher part would be called Mastro, and the Paul would be Paolo. So his name was Mastropaolo. We don't know that we're related, but we consider it an honor that there was someone like that teaching Michelangelo.
Yes, well, the student did quite well, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Now, you actually taught at the university level for 26 years, is that correct?
That's correct.
And you were the primary research scientist in the space program for the Douglas aircraft company?
I worked for McDonnell Douglas, and I worked in their space research facility, and we were working at the time on a manned orbiting laboratory. I also did some work on what they called the Manned Orbiting Animal Research Laboratory. They abbreviated that MOARF. And so I had experience researching what was necessary for humans out in space and also for experimental animals.
Yes, and you published in the peer-reviewed technical journals. How many articles have you published?
22 peer-reviewed articles in science journals.
Marvelous. And you were intimately involved in a world-class experiment that most of us saw, appreciated, admired, but you were the research scientist on this. Tell us about crossing the English Channel.
That was called the Gossamer Albatross Project, which was for a $220,000 prize offered by the Royal Aeronautical Society for the first man-powered aircraft without any kind of assistance that would fly strictly by human power across the English Channel from England to France.
Did you succeed?
We succeeded with the new theory that I employed in training the pilot. I may not have told you this before, but we had a very loose relationship on the project. I wasn't allowed to give the pilot orders. So what I did was, in an 80-mile bicycle race, I beat the third backup pilot and became third myself. Having done that, I then set a record on the bicycle ergometer, which the #1 pilot felt obliged to break. In the process, he was using my methods to break the record. And then I set another record for a longer period of time, which he also broke, and then finally set a record for 2 hours, which he broke. And then I had to employ the theory in a way I'd never employed it before, wasn't sure it would work, but did, and broke his record. And we immediately were asked to fly right after that. So it was perfect psychologically. He was the #1 pilot, but I had the record. I was twice his age. If he failed, he knew that he probably wouldn't be given another chance. So it was a wonderful kind of psychological situation to have him in. And he succeeded, but not without an enormous amount of difficulty. The head of the project asked me, he said, "Joseph, how long can he last? He may run into headwinds just before he gets to France." And I went to my data, because I keep track of every training exercise and so on, and I said he can last 170 minutes at the power to fly. He landed in 169 minutes, and they opened the canopy, and he fell out. He said he couldn't have gone another stroke.
Incredible. But then afterward, now, I hope this audience understands what you're getting. Here is a man who's published in the medical literature, in the technical literature, 22 peer review articles, who actually taught the best available in a new breakthrough technology. And not only did you show him how to succeed beyond his previous abilities, you then flew the English Channel using your insight. Is that correct?
Well, I wish that I had, but actually we weren't allowed to. But once we got back to the United States, we were given the opportunity of flying in that aircraft, and I did fly it. So that was an experience that I'll remember for the rest of my life.
Well, now we are getting in on this experience. The reason for having this world-class scholar on the program today is he knows things about the human physique and physiology, about biology, about the function of living systems. Dr. Mastropaolo, have you ever been an evolutionist?
Yes, I was, for most of my life. I always wanted to be a scientist. When I went to school, I was told rather early in my career that I had to make a choice. I would have to leave my faith to one side, thinking that the Bible was just a bunch of stories, and study science, and science said that evolution was correct. I never questioned it. I trusted my teachers. I looked at my biology book. I saw that parade of monkeys to chimpanzees to humans, and I thought they surely wouldn't be deceiving us. I thought that surely is the truth. And so for many years, I was an evolutionist. And I'm afraid that that was the biggest betrayal of my life when I finally looked into it and found that it was a sham that goes back 2,500 years to the ancient Greeks, Anaximander, who actually was propagating a vitalist, superstitious, substitute religion.
And it is a religion.
It is.
At the end of this program, we're going to talk about a challenge that you've given to the world's leading evolutionary scholars. Are you saying to this global audience that you are a creationist and a Bible believer from the scientific viewpoint in technical research?
That is the way I came to the Bible. I came to it from science. I actually had a faith, but it was destroyed by evolution.
Yes.
And I adhered and I persevered in science, and science eventually led me to examining what my fundamental belief was, evolution. And what I found was it was a complete sham. It was the biggest betrayal of my life.
We don't want you to be betrayed. In the last program, Dr. Mastropaolo led us through an incredible series of factual data showing that evolution cannot be true, that creation is the only scientific answer to living systems and the structure of the universe. Now let's take it beyond that and take advantage of every single moment. Would you pick up where you left off last time? I think we were talking about Eoanthropus dawsoni.
Yes, this was the Piltdown forgery. It was a fragment of a human skull and an orangutan jawbone, both dyed the same color, made to look like they came from the same organism, and in fact, they hadn't. The teeth were filed down, the articulations had been broken, so it couldn't be tested to see if it came from the same individual, and that was kept in the British Museum of Natural History for 40 years, and people with this scientific name, and people were saying, this is an ape man, and that is the reason that we should believe in evolution.
And it turned out to be a total fraud and forgery.
Yes, and I want to explain why I call it anti-biology. It's because it is a fraud. It was known to be a fraud when it was put in the museum, and it was given a scientific name with the purpose of deception. It was purposely designed to deceive people, people like myself who were in school at the time.
And succeeded for a period of time.
Yes, it did. And when you do something like that, what you're doing is you are militating against science because you are driving science back into the age of superstition instead of permitting science to progress. And when you go in the opposite direction with falsehoods, deceptions, these kinds of forgeries, what you're actually doing is you're working against biology, and that's why I call it anti-biology.
And with justification. Then we talked about Hesperopithecus harold-cookii. Let's say a word about him and then get to new information.
This was based on a single tooth, and the tooth wasn't human, wasn't chimpanzee, it was a pig's tooth.
Yes.
And yet this was used in the Scopes trial. Oh, yes.
To get evolution introduced into the public school system in the United States.
And you might find evolutionists to this day saying that the evolutionists prevailed in that trial, but they prevailed with false data.
And from a single tooth, I think this appeared in the London Sunday Times, this sketch, not only the tooth, but the entire man, his tools and ability to use them, his family, his domestication of available creatures nearby, an absolute fraud.
Absolutely a fraud. So we can go on then, because this came out about the 1920s, and here we have something in which they used a living person as a missing link ape man. It was actually an African pygmy by the name of Otabanga. His family was murdered when he was taken prisoner. He was brought to the United States. He was exhibited in the Bronx Zoo in the monkey house of the Bronx Zoo.
Incredible.
Before 40,000 spectators per day.
40,000 per day?
Yes. And they were being told that he is no more than apes or monkey. And when the religious leaders of New York City made a wonderful and very strong objection to using this noble individual in such a mean way, they silenced him, the New York Times did, by saying that evolution is in the textbooks of all the schools. And evolution is no more debatable than the multiplication system. And he is no more than monkey or apes. And that's the way they silenced the opposition.
But he was a noble individual.
A noble individual that was abused to suicide, because when he no longer could make money for them, he was abandoned. And he had no way of earning his passage back to Africa. And the result was that he saw no meaning to his life and committed suicide. His family murdered, he abused to suicide, and none of the evolutionists responsible were ever punished.
And probably never admitted any misdeed.
Probably not.
Oh, this is such valuable information. Take us beyond this.
Well, I then get into a study which is kept from the eyes of students. It's called the Oxnard Scientific Study. It was a multivariate statistical analysis on fossil bones, human as well as other organisms. It was a computer multidimensional rotation with matrix algebra. And the conclusion was, from all of this information and the way that it was analyzed, man is quite separate from non-human species.
Yes.
Ape men must be frauds or forgeries is essentially what this study says.
And incidentally, this audience needs to know that all of this data that this eminent scholar has put together is available in a booklet. Just contact the Creation Evidence Museum. We'll get you in touch with him. You need this information. Take us further, please.
This came out in the year 2001. It supposedly was on the basis of this toe bone. And it said in Time magazine, this toe bone proves the creature walked on two legs. I became very curious about how you could discern, because I have a background in biomechanics, how could you discern from one of three bones in one toe that the creature actually looked like a chimpanzee, incidentally, with blue eyes.
Oh.
With blue eyes. And doesn't he look vaguely like this Piltdown
yes.
forgery?
Yes.
And I became very curious about this, so I analyzed this bone. And this is the way I analyzed it. Incidentally, I don't believe another scientist in the world has done an analysis like this. But I put end lines on this bone in an objective way, side lines, and got a central axis. Then made measurements to the borders and made comparisons. This is the bone in question. And I made a comparison, statistical comparison, between the correlation of the measurements of this bone with this one and this one. And what I found was the toe bone was similar to human bone, so it was probably a human bone. It was dissimilar to monkey bone. It was most dissimilar to chimpanzees. Now that's strange, isn't it?
Strange. They're supposed to be closely related.
We're supposed to be closer to chimpanzees than to monkeys, but this is saying the opposite. Monkey and chimpanzee bones are dissimilar to human bone. Ape men must be frauds or forgeries because we have no relationship.
That's correct.
To either one of those. And this confirms the Oxnard study, which is the only other objective, valid, reliable, calibrated study that we have in literature.
To those in this audience, I want you to realize that we're talking to a world-class scholar who has the ability to analyze and to come up with conclusions that are definitive. I know you appreciate his being on the program today. And we're going to learn in a few moments, he has challenged the leading educational evolutionists of our generation, some 44, 45 of them, to appear in court, challenging the evolutionary hypothesis, attempting to show that either evolution is religious or creation is religious. Not a single one of them has consented to appear for an objective consideration of the question, is evolution religion or is it science? Well, we're learning evolution is a religious thesis, totally baseless from the standpoint of truth. Take us further, please.
Well, what I've done here is put together some of these data, the historical records that we have from Genesis, the time of the flood, and then what we have from the Bible, which is a decline in the longevity of people from about 900 years to about 70 years, about the time of David. And then I show that the graph is cut. And what we have here are the medically verified new genetic disorders that document devolution. They refute evolution. And what I've done is I've put these down and then drew a dotted line to the beginning of the flood. Now that dotted line is inference, what I call
Certainly.
inference. I have no scientific evidence for that, but it is a possible explanation
Yes.
based on scientific evidence and historic records.
And this is scientific data that we need to repeat to this audience for this program. We talked about it at length on the first program. Since 1966, how many new genetic disorders have been discovered that are actually new? We're in a mushroom of depravity and decay. How many new genetic disorders?
Well, starting in 1966, there were 1,487, and they increased, as you see, to beyond 15,000.
In just that short span of some 40 years.
Correct.
We are in entropy. We're running down. Now, we have only moments left. Give us some more information.
Well, the evolutionists have in their books, their biology books, this apparatus which was designed by Stanley Miller. And what he did was he put in methane, which I've put the equation for there, ammonia, water, and hydrogen into this apparatus. And what he got out was glycine and alanine, 2 amino acids. But if you look at the equations, you can see that the constituent chemicals for these were actually put in the apparatus.
Certainly.
So there is no miracle about why he got it like that. And of course, you can't find this apparatus out in the wild anywhere. So I try to show in a humorous way exactly what he did. And I show it here where I say from chemicals to car and bread. If you put iron ore, charcoal, sand, rubber, and tree sap in this volcano, according to his logic, you could tell the students out will pop a Rolls-Royce automobile.
Oh, yes, would be nice. Just wait at the bottom of the hill. It'll be natural.
The iron ore and the charcoal will make steel, the sand will melt and make glass, the rubber will vulcanize and give you the rubber tires. Or if you want to use this concept with a shorter period of time, this took a week. If you just want to do it in 3 or 4 hours, you put flour, water, and salt and yeast in this apparatus, and out will pop the bread.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
According to his logic, those would be evidences for automobiles and bread to have evolved millions of years ago on the Earth.
You know, corollary to that, I'll just mention briefly, quite often before an audience, I take a can of Campbell's soup. It already has all the amino acids. It has them in structural form. And I say, just wait long enough, we'll have a living system come from this can of Campbell's soup because all the ingredients are in place. And some of the evolutionists really get irate at that illustration. But if their thesis is true, sooner or later, that should produce a living system. But it never has, never can, even with everything in place.
Correct. And you know why they become irate, Dr. Baugh? You are criticizing their religion.
Their religion, that is correct. It's not science, it's religion. Give us a couple more of these beautiful points of information, please.
Well, this is an evolutionist's missing link cell. It was called, given a scientific name, Protomoeba primitiva. And what it actually was shown in this textbook was reproducing. And yet, upon investigation, what was found was this was not a living cell. It was a sulfate of lime, which is completely inert, doesn't live, couldn't reproduce. It was a complete fraud. So that's why I've called it Anti-Biology Exhibit number 7.
Wow. We have about a minute and a half. Can you give us this illustration? Would you come back for one more program? This audience is just left on the edge of their seats. Will you do that?
I would be honored to do that, Dr. Baugh.
Can you give us in a nutshell this illustration and we'll close?
This is what the evolutionists used in the 1800s. It's called their lowbrow to highbrow progression. And they show fish, snake, crocodile, bird, dog, monkey, idiot, savage, Mongolian, Caucasian. And this is supposed to be their sequence of evolution. And of course, it came from a book which is called Madness in America. And that, I think, says what it really is.
It says it quite well. For this audience, you have been privileged today to listen to a maestro, to a master in science, a man who has all the credentials, who not only has the credentials, he has to his credit world-class research and ability to analyze systems, particularly living systems. He was taught evolution, he espoused it. He abandoned evolution not on religious grounds, but on scientific grounds, because he found evolutionary theory to be religious in nature. He wanted to stay with science, and he found that the science led him to the truth of scientific creation, to the truth of biblical creation. He knows the Creator firsthand. Wouldn't you like to know the Creator? It's not just enough to be convinced of these facts. It's not just enough to be exposed to truth. You need to embrace truth. Truth is really a person. His name is Jesus Christ. Wouldn't you at this moment embrace Jesus Christ? Would you just bow your head and pray this simple prayer? Just pray it with me from your heart. Dear God, I need you. Thank you for making me. But I'm a fallen creature. I've sinned. I need your forgiveness. This very moment, I ask Jesus Christ into my heart right now. Lord Jesus, come in. Cover me with your blood. Save me forever, I pray. I'll serve you with all my heart. In Christ's name, amen. My friend, if you prayed that simple prayer, the God of the universe stepped into your heart. Now you're a new creature. I challenge you to walk with the Creator of the universe. Information like you've received today is available at the Creation Evidence Museum in printed form, in videos. We even have a coloring book for the kids. Just call or write us at Creation Evidence Museum, P.O. Box 309, Glen Rose, Texas 76043, area code 254-897-3200, or check us out on the web, creationevidence.org.